People often believe the deepest scars are the ones left on the skin, but the most painful are the ones no one ever touches, the ones hidden behind a quiet smile. I have carried mine for decades, as if they were stitched into the very air I breathe. My name is Ernestine Ramos. I'm 72 years old, and most people in my neighborhood know me only as the widow who sells embroidered kitchen towels at the farmer's market in a small town in New Mexico. I always wear a floral scarf on my head and greet people with a shy smile. I look serene, untouchable, but beneath that calm appearance, there is a truth few could ever imagine. After so many years of silence, I finally feel the need to speak. My hands tremble whenever I hear church bells or see a bride walking to the altar. Weddings, which should mean joy, awaken in me a darkness I've carried since I was young. I have kept this secret locked inside me for over half a century, choking on words I could never say. The silence consumed me, slowly turning into a prison I built around myself. Now, as an old woman, I don't want to leave this world without telling the truth. I owe it not to myself, but to the young women who come after me. I want my granddaughters, and any girl who hears this story, to know that their voices are not small, that their words can save them. My silence almost destroyed me, but their courage, their ability to speak out, can be their shield. I know there will be people who judge me, who say the past should remain buried, but what I lived shaped everything. The way I love, the way I trust, the way I raise my children, even the way I look at men without lowering my eyes. Every part of me is marked by what I endured. If I open my heart now, it is not to shock, but to transform shame into testimony, to turn wounds into words. My voice may be old and worn, but perhaps it can reach someone who is living in silence right now. Sometimes one shared story is enough to light courage in another soul. So I ask you, before I go on, if my words touch you in any way, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It gives me strength to keep sharing stories like mine. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I remember with perfect clarity the wooden house where I spent my earliest years, in a small desert town in New Mexico, surrounded by mesas that glowed red at sunset. The smell of fresh coffee always lingered in the air, mixing with the scent of bread baked in the clay oven. Outside, it was a modest home, but in my memory, it shines like a palace. Mornings began with the sound of roosters and the creak of doors opening. My mother would prepare a simple breakfast, bread with butter, sometimes with a drizzle of honey if we were lucky. My two younger brothers would tumble out of bed barefoot, their hair sticking up, racing across the cool wooden floor. I, being the eldest, already felt the duty of watching over them as if I were years older. My father worked long hours, in the fields, growing corn, beans, and chilies. I often followed him, carrying baskets though my hands were too small. The sun beat down mercilessly, sweat dripping from his forehead, but he always smiled with patience, teaching me how to tell plants apart by their smell and touch. Those moments made me feel part of his world. School was a 30-minute walk along a dusty road lined with mesquite trees. Each step felt like an adventure, picking up smooth stones to save as treasures, listening to the birds hidden in the branches, watching wildflowers bloom in spring as if the desert itself was celebrating. Our teacher had a stern voice, but her eyes were soft, and I admired her deeply. Afternoons were a different universe. While my mother sewed by the window, humming softly, I played games with my brothers. Sometimes we hid among the chickens. Sometimes we climbed the old pecan tree in the yard. Our laughter rang through the air like bells, free and endless. Sundays were the most anticipated days. The family would gather around the big table, covered with a checkered cloth. My mother served steaming bowls of pozole. My father opened a bottle of homemade wine, and we all shared stories. The rich smell of hominy and chili filled the house for hours, making the walls feel warmer. At night, the radio became the heart of our living room. A large wooden box with a glowing orange light. It played rancheras, news, and novelas that we followed religiously. My mother, no matter how tired, never skipped singing us a lullaby before bed. Her voice was a blanket of comfort, protecting us from fear. In the summers, the heat forced us to sleep with the windows wide open. The smell of dry earth and blooming cactus flowers drifted inside, along with the hum of crickets. I often stayed awake, staring at the moon, convinced that as long as it shone above me, the world was safe. When the town's fiestas arrived, the plaza lit up with lanterns and music. Neighbors danced to mariachi. Children ran after firecrackers, and the smell of fresh churros filled the night. I can still see my mother in a simple floral dress, laughing with joy, while my father held her hand proudly as they spun across the dance floor. That image became my definition of love. Winters, though, were harsh. The wind cut through every crack in the house, chilling us to the bone. But the fireplace burned brightly in the living room, and we huddled around it while my mother knitted scarves for us. Her hands were cracked, but she always found a way to give us warmth. I was a curious child, always asking why the sky changed colors at sunset, or how seeds knew when to sprout. My father answered patiently, though sometimes he made up magical tales. He told me the stars were candles lit by shepherds who had left this world, so we'd never walk in darkness. I believed him, and it gave me peace. My brothers were my refuge. We shared secrets, mischief, and small fears. Once, when a big stray dog scared us on the road to school, my younger brother grabbed my hand tightly, as if he were the older one. That gesture stayed with me. Our instinct to protect each other was already strong. My grandmother lived nearby, in a small adobe house painted white. She always kept cookies in a tin and a rosary in her hands. Her wrinkled voice told stories of saints and miracles. I was fascinated by her certainty, in a world I couldn't see, but felt real through her words. The weekly market was another delight. We walked together among stalls of spices, cheese, and flowers. The shouts of vendors, the tolling church bells, the clinking of coins in my father's calloused hands, all blended into a colorful scene that I adored. In those days, I never imagined that life could change. I thought the world would always remain the same. My mother singing, my father working, games in the yard, fiestas in the plaza. Everything seemed eternal, as solid as the church tower watching us from the hill. Even the smallest daily tasks felt meaningful. Fetching water from the well, grinding corn, lighting the fire. Each act gave me pride, a sense of belonging to something larger than myself. That home was my entire world, and nothing else seemed important. Looking back, my childhood feels like a photograph bathed in golden sunlight, simple, warm, and safe. And maybe that's why what came after felt so violent in contrast. When pain arrived, it didn't just steal my happiness. It shattered the illusion that life was unbreakable. But even now, when I close my eyes, I can return to that house. I can smell the fresh bread, hear my mother's lullaby, and feel the laughter of my brothers. Those memories are my roots, the one part of me no one could ever take away. Everything began to crumble when my mother got sick. At first it was dizziness she tried to hide, then a cough that wouldn't go away, and soon whole days confined to bed, too weak even to hum the lullabies that once filled our nights. The house, once alive with sound, turned heavy and silent, as if even the walls were holding their breath. I was only 13, but I felt myself pulled suddenly into adulthood. My father tried to hold everything together. He spent longer hours in the fields, pushing his body to exhaustion to compensate for what my mother could no longer do. I stepped into her place inside the house, cooking, sweeping, caring for my younger brothers. My hands burned from the firewood, cracked from the cold water, but there was no room to complain. Responsibility had fallen on me like a weight too large for my small shoulders. Without my mother's voice, our nights felt empty. My brothers begged me to sing to them, but the words caught in my throat. I would hum softly, but every note reminded me of what we were losing. The fear of her never rising again lay heavy on my chest, stealing the joy from even our games. With her illness came a stream of relatives. They arrived claiming to help, to sit with her, to take care of things around the house. Suddenly, our home was full of footsteps that didn't belong, of voices cutting through the fragile quiet. Some brought real comfort, but others made me uneasy in ways I didn't yet understand. Among them was my uncle, my mother's brother. He was a respected man in town, always in a pressed suit, always speaking with calm authority, always quick with a reassuring smile. Neighbors greeted him with admiration in the plaza, treating him almost like a saint. No one would have believed the shadow that lurked behind his polished facade. My father welcomed him with gratitude, convinced his presence was a blessing. My uncle brought medicines, went to the market, and presented himself as our family's savior. To everyone else, he was a man of honor. But to me, from the very beginning, there was something in his eyes that made me lower mine in fear. Each day, my mother grew weaker. Her body thinned. Her voice broke into whispers. I spent hours at her side, pressing cool cloths to her forehead, holding her frail hand. Sometimes she would look at me with tired eyes and whisper, "Take care of your brothers." I would nod, swallowing the lump in my throat, silently promising what felt impossible. Her illness didn't just keep her in bed. It shifted the entire rhythm of our home. Joy vanished, games disappeared, and every day became heavy with dread. I tried to stay strong, but at night I hid in the yard, crying under the same pecan tree where laughter used to echo. It was this void, this broken structure, that created an opening for danger. While my father buried himself in the fields, and my mother lay too weak to see, my uncle stepped deeper into our lives. His authority grew silently. His presence wrapped around us like a net, and though I couldn't yet put it into words, I felt the threat tightening. That was how the wolf walked into our home dressed as a shepherd, and how I, still just a girl, became the prey of a secret that would shape my entire life. My uncle began visiting us almost every day. He always arrived with something in hand, fresh bread, fruit, or medicine, and my father welcomed him with open gratitude. From the kitchen, I watched how he settled into every corner of the house with a quiet authority, as if he belonged more than we did. No one questioned his kindness. At first, his attention toward me seemed harmless, the way an affectionate uncle might act. He asked about school, patted my shoulder, smiled too warmly, but soon those gestures began to linger. His hand resting too long, his eyes following me even when I turned away. It was a tension that made me uncomfortable, though I didn't yet have words for it. My father, worn down from long days in the fields, noticed nothing. He came home exhausted and thanked my uncle for everything he did. "He's a blessing," he would say. I nodded silently, though inside my chest tightened. I knew that if I dared speak my suspicions, no one would believe me. Week by week, my uncle began making decisions that weren't his to make. How to arrange the pantry, what medicine my mother should take, even which days we should go to town. His voice carried the weight of command disguised as advice. To me, it felt like he was slowly taking possession of our home. One afternoon, as I washed dishes, he came too close. He corrected the way I held the sponge, taking my hands in his, and whispering that I needed to learn to be an obedient young lady. A shiver ran through me. When my father stepped into the kitchen, my uncle pulled back instantly, returning to his practiced, light-hearted tone. The contrast was dizzying. In public, he was a model of generosity. In private, his eyes and words became traps. I started avoiding him, slipping away into the yard, rushing upstairs, always searching for ways to escape being alone with him. But he always found a way to corner me. My little brothers adored him, laughing at his jokes, running to hug him when he arrived. Meanwhile, I lived in constant fear, my heart racing at every sound. Nights became unbearable. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every creak in the wood sounding like his footsteps outside my door. One day, while I was sitting with my mother, he entered the room without knocking. He leaned too close to her bed, and I instinctively stepped between them, taking the glass of water before he could touch it. His smile tightened, but his eyes flashed with something that froze me. In that moment I knew with certainty this was not just discomfort. This was danger. His words grew more pointed. He began saying things wrapped as compliments. How I was growing so quickly. How soon I would be a beautiful woman. I lowered my head, wishing I could vanish. I understood that these words carried intentions that were anything but innocent. My body reacted before my mind did. My stomach clenched, my palms sweated, my knees trembled whenever he came near. My instincts screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The home that once felt like refuge had turned into a wooden cage. At family gatherings, my uncle was untouchable. He carved the meat, raised toasts, told stories that made everyone laugh. No one saw past the mask. I sat in silence, screaming inside, wondering if anyone would ever notice the monster hiding in plain sight. One Sunday afternoon, with neighbors chatting in the yard, he asked me to help carry things into the barn. Inside, the air smelled of dust and hay. Once we were alone, he stepped too close, brushing my arm in a way that left no doubt about his intent. My heart pounded so loud, I thought it would give me away. Only when someone called from outside did he retreat, pretending nothing had happened. That moment left me shaken. I began dressing in looser clothes, wearing longer skirts, crossing my arms over my chest whenever I walked. In the mirror, I no longer saw a cheerful girl, but someone trying desperately to disappear. The silence around me became unbearable. How could I accuse him when the entire town revered him? How could I speak when my voice would only be drowned in disbelief? I swallowed the truth again and again, burying it deeper each time. My mother, too weak to rise from bed, barely noticed what was happening. I longed to confide in her, but I couldn't lay another burden on her frail body. So I carried it alone, choosing her peace over my own cries for help. Even when he wasn't there, my uncle haunted me. Every knock on the door made me flinch. Every mention of his name made the air grow heavier. His shadow followed me, invading my thoughts, poisoning even the moments when I should have felt safe. The innocence I once had was dissolving, replaced by constant vigilance. I no longer played freely with my brothers or listened to my father's stories with joy. Everything was filtered through the dread of his presence. The child in me was slowly disappearing. The cruelest part was the admiration he continued to receive. People praised him as a saint, saying our family wouldn't survive without him. Each compliment felt like a blade twisting inside me. I wanted to scream that they were wrong, but my lips stayed sealed. Over time, I realized his cruelty wasn't reckless. It was calculated. He built his power carefully, hiding behind good deeds, weaving control into everyday life. And I, too young and too isolated, had no escape. Fear didn't arrive in one violent blow. It dripped into my life like a leak, seeping through every corner, until it soaked me completely. Day after day, I lived waiting for the inevitable, trapped in a silence no one else could hear. That was how my nights of sleeplessness began, how my trembling hands became constant, how silence turned from refuge into prison. And though the worst hadn't yet come, I already knew my childhood was over. From that moment on, my life split into two worlds, the one everyone saw and the one I carried inside. To others, I was still the girl who kept the house running, who cared for her brothers, who seemed dependable. But within me, fear had taken root, wrapping around every thought and gesture. I rose before dawn, sometimes even before the roosters crowed, to prepare breakfast and tidy the house. Every sound in the hallway made my heart leap. Each creak of the floorboards felt like a warning. My days began in fear and ended with the same knot tightening in my throat. I learned to move quietly, to step on the floor without making the boards squeak, to slip into corners whenever I heard his voice. My body became a map of survival strategies: where to stand, what excuses to invent, how to vanish before he could trap me alone. The nights were the worst. The groans of wood, once comforting, became signals of terror. I slept with my clothes on, pulling the blanket to my chin, whispering prayers that the door would stay closed. The moonlight on the wall felt more like a threat than a comfort. I started wearing looser clothes, long skirts, blouses that hid me. While other girls my age in town wore ribbons in their hair and boasted of new dresses, I made myself small, invisible, hoping he wouldn't notice me anymore. My body revealed what my lips could not. I lost weight. My hands trembled constantly. My stomach ached for no reason. To others, it looked like exhaustion from housework, from my mother's illness, from poverty. No one looked deeper to see the truth. With my brothers, I forced myself to smile, to invent games, to protect their childhood from my torment. I became a second mother, swallowing my tears so they wouldn't see them. They were the only reason I kept fighting. Silence became my shield. It was the only thing that kept me safe. If I spoke, I risked tearing the family apart, risked disbelief, risked everything. But the same silence that protected me also chained me. My father, blind with gratitude, praised my uncle endlessly. "He's our guardian angel," he would say. Each word pierced me. I wanted to scream truth, but the fear of not being believed sealed my lips tighter. Over time, I began to anticipate my uncle's moves. I knew when he would come into the kitchen, when he would linger too long, when his smile would shift into something darker. I lived in constant vigilance, exhausted but always alert. It was the only way I could stay one step ahead. Sometimes I fooled myself into feeling safe. I'd lose myself in kneading dough, hanging laundry, or listening to my brother's laugh. For brief moments, I pretended everything was fine. But sooner or later, the shadow returned. I found hiding places, the attic, the chicken coop, even under the large kitchen table. I crouched in silence, holding my breath until his footsteps faded. I was like a hunted animal waiting for danger to pass. At school, my grades slipped. I couldn't focus on lessons. My mind was always elsewhere, trapped in dread of what awaited at home. My teacher asked if I was sick, and I forced a smile, shaking my head. She never knew. The exhaustion was relentless. Sleepless nights bled into weary days. I scrubbed floors, cooked, washed clothes, all while my body begged for rest. Fatigue became my way of numbing the fear. Fear became so familiar, it almost felt like part of me. Like a chronic illness, it weighed on me constantly. I stopped expecting a day without it. It was my new normal. Some nights, I wondered if it was my fault, if I had somehow caused his gaze, his touch, his pursuit. The poison of his presence seeped into my thoughts, twisting my sense of self-worth. I began writing scraps of words on torn paper, hiding them in a notebook beneath my mattress. I am afraid. I want to disappear. Please, let Mom get better. That notebook became my only voice, the only place where my screams could live. The marks on my body were invisible to others. Not bruises, but the stiffness in my shoulders, the ache in my stomach, the tension in my jaw. Physical echoes of the silence I carried. Eventually, I even learned to anticipate my own reactions. I could feel when my breathing would quicken, when my palms would sweat, when panic was rising. I tried to control it with deep breaths, focusing on something else. It was my way of fighting back in secret. My brothers grew, blissfully unaware. I shielded them fiercely, letting them laugh and play while I swallowed my despair. They hugged me without knowing they were my lifeline, the only light keeping me from complete darkness. The town continued to revere my uncle. They greeted him with respect, invited him into their homes, praised him in church. The contrast was unbearable. To them, a savior. To me, a predator. I began to split in two. There was the girl the world saw, quiet, obedient, helpful. And then there was the other me, the broken child hiding under the covers at night. Living both at once was tearing me apart. Each day, my hope that someone would notice grew smaller. No one seemed to look past the surface. I was invisible in my suffering. Yet even in the darkest days, I found moments of strength. My brother's laughter, my mother's weak smile, my father's gratitude for my help. Those small glimpses of love reminded me I couldn't give up completely. Silence transformed my voice. I spoke less and less, my words clipped and short. To others I seemed shy, but my silence wasn't shyness, it was survival. And so the months stretched on, a routine of fear, hidden tears, and endless labor. A routine that stole my childhood but taught me how to endure. Looking back, I know silence was both my enemy and my shield. It kept me alive, even as it took my voice away, piece by piece. I don't know when it happened exactly, but one day I stopped shrinking from him and started studying him. I watched the way his voice softened when others were near and sharpened when we were alone. How he favored the back hallway because the boards there were quieter. How he arrived after sunset when my father was still in the fields. I kept a silent ledger in my mind. Times, places, excuses he used. How long he lingered, whether he closed the door or left it ajar. Turning fear into observation didn't erase the terror, but it gave me edges to hold on to. Knowledge felt like a pocket knife. Small, hidden, but sharp enough to cut a few threads in the net he had woven around me. I began to invent better escapes. If he asked me to help in the shed, I remembered bread in the oven. If he hovered in the kitchen, I made noise, clattered pots, dropped a spoon, opened a window so neighbors could hear. I forgot things in other rooms, forcing myself to cross doorways that might reveal us to someone passing by. Once, when his hand hovered near my shoulder, I coughed loudly and called to my brothers as if I needed them immediately. They came running, all elbows and questions, and he stepped back with that practiced smile. Noise, I discovered, could be a shield. Interruption, a kind of armor. I made the house work. For me, I learned which floorboards wailed like sirens and which hinges squealed. I left a broom leaning at a strategic angle so that if a door moved, it would clatter and reveal us. I tucked a bell from my grandmother's sewing box behind the curtain. Nothing visible, just enough that a tug on the fabric would make it sing. At night, I wedged a chair under my bedroom knob and stacked enamel bowls that would crash if nudged. My protections were simple, homemade, and maybe silly to someone else. But to me, they were battlements. Every little trap I set against quiet felt like carving windows into a locked room. At school, my teacher noticed my shadows, even if she didn't know their name. She let me stay after class to organize the maps, her voice calm, no questions that might scare me back into silence. She showed me the library cupboard where the key stuck unless you turned it slowly, gave me a spare pencil, and wrote her initials on a small card. "If you ever need me, show this to the principal," she whispered, like sharing a secret path in a dark forest. I didn't use the card, but I carried it everywhere, tucked into the hem of my notebook. Just knowing I had a route to another adult loosened the knot around my lungs. The neighbor across the street, the one with the clay pots and bright marigolds, became another quiet harbor. She never asked for details, only handed me a glass of water and kept me on her porch a few minutes longer when she saw me pale. She taught me to deadhead flowers, how to pinch with 2 fingers and breathe slowly when the world felt too loud. "Plants know," she said once, pressing a tiny packet of seeds into my palm. "They lean toward a light by instinct. People can too." We agreed on a signal. If I left a folded dishcloth on our window ledge, she would cross the street and ask for sugar, no matter the hour. That promise shone like a lantern. At night, when terror coiled in my chest, I wrote plans instead of pleas. I drew the rooms of the house from memory, marking the noisiest boards with little stars. I listed safe faces: teacher, neighbor, the butcher's wife, who always touched my cheek and said I was strong. I rehearsed sentences I might say if cornered. "Please step back. I am not alone. I will tell." Sometimes I could barely breathe as I wrote them, but seeing the words on paper made them feel more real, as if my future voice had already left a trace for me to follow when my courage finally arrived. I folded my brothers into my defenses. I sent them on errands in pairs, never alone, and taught them our own small code. If I said I needed blue thread, it meant stay close. If I asked for the big spoon, it meant fetch father. They thought it was a game and played it with giddy seriousness, delighted to win when they got the message right. They never knew the stakes, only that their big sister clapped and said they were clever. In protecting them, I found an anchor for myself, a reason sturdier than fear, a love bigger than the silence pressing on my lungs. I claimed public places as temporary sanctuaries. I volunteered to sweep the church steps on Saturdays, to help sort canned goods at the small pantry behind the parish hall, to stack books at the library. Wherever other eyes were, I made myself useful. There, under fluorescent lights or beneath the open sky, his shadow couldn't stretch as far. I joined a little choir of girls my age, not because I loved singing, I barely had a voice left, but because rehearsals meant witnesses, and witnesses meant he had to keep his mask on. Every schedule I stitched outside the house trimmed his room to maneuver. Inside our home, I rearranged bedtime as if it were furniture. I asked my brothers to camp in my room on hot nights, invented stories that needed all three of us to keep watch for imaginary coyotes, insisted we fall asleep, piled together like puppies. I convinced my mother, when she had the strength, to nap in my bed during the afternoons, so her scent would linger and make the room feel less exposed. I learned to sleep light and to wake fast, a sparrow on a wire, never fully at rest, but not helpless either. When he tested the edges, I tested mine too. Once, he brushed past me in the pantry and murmured something meant to trap me in shame. I turned, looked him straight in the face and said clearly, "Do not block my way." My voice surprised us both. He laughed, too loud, too smooth, but he moved aside. Another time, when he tried to send my brothers out to play, I answered, "They're staying, and so am I," tapping a spoon against the table until the sound filled the kitchen like a bell. The message was small but firm. I would not go quietly where he wanted me. I drafted letters I never mailed, to my aunt in another town, to a social worker whose name I copied from a notice board at church, to my future self. I wrote dates, scenes, the shape of fear on particular days. Then I ripped the pages and hid them under the mattress, terrified someone would find them and call me a liar. But the act of addressing someone, anyone, shifted a stone inside me. It reminded me there were doors beyond the walls I knew, and someday I might walk through one without asking permission. I practiced taking up an inch more space. I braided my hair tighter, not to vanish, but to feel my scalp hold me. I chose sturdy shoes that thudded on the floorboards, a rhythm that announced I was there. I lifted my chin for an extra second when someone spoke to me, long enough to see their eyes soften at the sight of mine. These were not costumes of bravery, but habits, small stitches I sewed into each day, so the fabric of me wouldn't unravel completely when fear tugged too hard. He noticed the changes. Predators do. He grew more careful in some ways, more impatient in others, testing different doors now that a few had closed. He spread thicker praise in public, angled for moments that never came, tried to trap me with obligation disguised as kindness. But every thwarted attempt chipped a grain from the pedestal the town had placed him on, at least in my private vision. In that private vision, he shrank a little, and I grew, barely but measurably, like a sapling insisting on its inch of sky. The day I realized I could make choices inside the cage, the air shifted. I was not free. The danger had not passed. Yet my hands remembered they could move. My mind remembered it could plan. And my mouth, parched but patient, remembered it was built to speak. I didn't confuse resistance with safety or strategy with rescue. I understood that what waited ahead would require more than cleverness. Still, the seeds were in the ground, watered by every list. Every look held a heartbeat longer, every bell placed where a curtain could sing. Soon I knew the roots would push downward, and something would have to break, either the soil that held me or the silence that starved me. The breaking point came on a summer night, when the heat made it impossible to close the windows, and the moon painted every corner of the house silver. I lay awake in my bed, clothes on as always, when I heard the door creak. My body stiffened instantly. I didn't need to see him to know it was him. He stepped inside with careful, deliberate movements, thinking everyone else was asleep. The air thickened until I could barely breathe. I tried to stay still, to pretend I was sleeping, but every nerve in me screamed. He leaned closer, his shadow stretching across my bed, and I felt the familiar weight of dread pressing down. Then something inside me snapped. Instead of freezing as I always had, I opened my mouth and let out a scream, loud, raw, and desperate. It was a sound I didn't know I was capable of, tearing through the silence like a bell shattering glass. My uncle jerked back, startled, his calm mask cracking for the first time. He hissed for me to quiet down, but my scream had already done its work. Within seconds, my father burst through the door, face pale and eyes wide. "What's going on?" he demanded. I was shaking so violently I could hardly form words, but I managed to whisper, "Don't leave me alone with him." The words came out broken, but they were clear enough. My uncle quickly spun a story, claiming he'd heard a noise and came to check on me. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, dripping with innocence. My father, confused, looked between us. He didn't know what to believe, but a seed of doubt had been planted. That night changed something in me. For the first time, I realized I could fight back, not with strength, but with sound. My voice, the very thing I had buried in silence, had power. A single scream had shattered the grip he held over me, if only for a moment. In the days that followed, my uncle tried to act even kinder, more generous, as if to erase what had happened. But I saw the flicker of unease in his eyes when I met his gaze. He knew I was no longer the same. His control had slipped, and he felt it. One afternoon, when no one else was around, he leaned close and murmured, "Screams won't save you. No one will believe you." His words dripped like poison. But this time, instead of lowering my eyes, I lifted my chin. I met his stare and said, steady though my hands shook, "I won't stay quiet anymore." It was only a few words, but they were a crack of lightning in the darkness. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was resisting, and I saw, in the tightening of his jaw, that he understood it too. From that moment on, I began to place myself closer to allies. The teacher who had noticed my silence, the neighbor who read sadness in my face. I didn't yet tell them everything, but I clung to their presence, their kindness, as if drawing strength from their steady eyes. The risk was greater now. My uncle knew I was slipping from his grasp, and I knew he might try harder to keep me there. But fear no longer held me entirely. Something had awakened, and it refused to be. Silenced again, I realized then that resistance wasn't enough. One day I would have to speak the whole truth. One day I would have to tear the silence apart completely. And though I didn't know how or when, I carried that certainty like a hidden flame. That summer night was the turning point. It didn't end the danger. It didn't end his presence. But it ended my complete submission. The girl who cowered in silence had vanished, and in her place, a voice, fragile, trembling, but real, had begun to rise. In the months that followed, I found the courage I had long buried. On the eve of my wedding, with my dress hanging by the bed, and my heart torn between fear and hope, the nightmare returned. My uncle forced his way into the room where I was preparing. That night, in the silence that smothered my screams, he stole from me what I had tried so hard to protect: my innocence, my trust, and the dream of beginning a family in love. Soon after, I learned I was pregnant. What should have been a blessing felt like a sentence carved in stone. I walked to the altar with a smile stitched onto my face, my steps heavy with secrets. Everyone saw a happy bride. No one saw the storm inside me. My silence became my armor, though it also trapped me. I cooked, cleaned, played the devoted wife. But every night I cried quietly into the pillow, mourning a life that had been twisted before it began. It was a neighbor who first handed me a spark of courage. A simple woman, she noticed my empty stare, my cold hands, the way I seemed to disappear into myself. One afternoon, she whispered, "Child, life doesn't end when someone tries to kill us from the inside. It ends only when we stop fighting." Those words lodged in my chest, a lifeline I clung to. The danger grew sharper when my uncle began circling even after the wedding, reminding me in veiled words that I would never be free of him. I realized then that silence might cost not only my life, but also the child I carried, the weight of that. Truth pushed me toward a choice I had long feared but could no longer avoid. So trembling but resolute, I told my husband the truth. I expected disbelief, anger, even abandonment. Instead, he looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "You are not alone." Those 4 words did not erase the past, but they shattered the chains of silence I had lived under. For the first time, I felt the ground beneath me solid enough to stand. The town never stopped praising my uncle, never saw the monster behind his mask. He walked freely, untouched, but inside me something had shifted. The secret no longer owned me. I had given it a voice, and with that voice came a measure of freedom. Healing was slow, uneven, but real. If this part of my story touched you, please like this video so it can reach others who may need courage. Subscribe for more stories like mine, and share in the comments what you felt while hearing it. Your support allows me to keep speaking after a lifetime of silence. Now, when I watch my granddaughters run through the plaza, laughing with unbroken joy, I feel a knot in my throat. I pray they never carry the weight I did. Though they may not yet understand, I tell them, never bury your voice. It is your shield, your salvation. And as for me, I survived, I endured, and my voice, though trembling, will never be silenced again.